The Joyful Friar podcast is made possible by the generous support of our friends. To support the podcast, please visit nathan-castle.com and donate today. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. I'm Father Nathan Castle, your host. Today we'll be doing the second part of a trilogy that is called Pete, Angel Marco, and Erik. Last time I told the story of Pete. Pete brought his story to me in a dream during the night of July the 7th of 2021. So that's more than 4 years ago now. We helped him only a couple of weeks after that. So this story does go back a ways, but we've been looking back over some of our archives for stories that we think that might be helpful to you, to members of this audience. We chose this one. I told his story in last week's episode, so if you didn't catch last week's episode, that was the first part of a trilogy. So I would recommend you go back and listen to that first. But in short, uh, I, Pete showed me in a dream a car or a pickup truck coming too fast on a road, going over a fence, a hedge, and landing in a way that killed the driver, and it crashed into a wedding reception where it also killed two people who were at an outdoor party adjacent to this road. That's the short story of it. Well, as it turned out, we very frequently ask for the guardian angel of the person who brought the dream to come on the line first and orient us to how we might do our work better. The angel Marco spoke and said, "This is the voice now of Marco, the guardian. I've never been invited inside another one quite like this before, so I'm getting accustomed to taking the way that I perceive things and moving into eyeballs and skin. In my lap, his lap, which is now our lap, is a small dog named Toto. And my beloved Toto, has died in a couple of months ago, but very frequently he was in my lap as we did crossings of this kind. Karen, my prayer partner, one of the prayer partners, said, "So is this new for you?" And he said, "Well, when you make your journey here, you'll experience many new things. And should there ever come a moment when you think you've experienced all there is to experience, you'll know that you're deceiving yourself." So anyway, he was willing to do something new, and he broke the ice, explaining to us a little bit more of what we had seen in the dream. Um, and he also offered the fact that the one that he guarded and loved had studied this process that we do, this crossing business, and different ways in which it might happen. He compared different ways that this could happen for him, and he chose us. And he hoped that he would get Karen. Karen is on many of these. She does counseling in Southern California. And the guardian, Marco, said he hoped he would get you. So Marco slid aside, promising to assist us in prayer, and Pete came on the line. Pete wasn't really explicit about whether he had gone to college, was doing any college. He had a methodical mind. He was young enough that he hadn't yet settled upon a career. He knew he needed to do that. Of course, his accident and death uh, happened before he was very far along in that process. He told us that the basics, that yes, he had been driving a little too fast. The way that the curve that he missed was banked, he ended up going over it and over a hedge. He said the hedge had a bit of a fence in it, but it wouldn't have been enough to stop a car. He said that the car became something of a missile. It went airborne and landed on its grill. He offered, in a kind of dispassionate way, the detail that I went through the windshield as the my truck landed on two people, and three of us died. Um, I'm going to read a little bit here. He said, I died in an instant and I was responsible for the deaths of two other people, but I was very instantly very well cared for by competent helpers. I have seen this over and over again where there are very competent, compassionate helpers, very often people who had careers as ambulance drivers or first responders of one kind or another. They have the skill for being on the scene of something tragic and doing only what's needed to be done. He said they've shown me something of what it might have looked like from a height because Pete wanted to know what happened. He didn't only want to know that it happened, but he had a kind of a curious mind about how things work, and in this case, how his accident played out. He said they wouldn't let me go closer because it would have been too ugly, but they did show me what happened in the most basic way that I could see it, sort of from above. I wanted to stop there because his helpers didn't want to traumatize him further by allowing him to see too much detail of what had happened in his accident. Sometimes people who are left behind and are grieving the loss of a loved one in a violent and tragic way might wish they had that option because sometimes people watch a loved one die in a traffic accident or get shot or stabbed or something. Very often people will have a graphic, terrible image of the last moments of a loved one's life. When that happens, um, that might create a need for afterlife or afterwards healing of that image. I would like to suggest that if you find yourself in a traumatic or PTSD style loop around having horror as a picture, please get help. And please bring with you the hope that you don't have to be stuck with that image for the rest of your life. Please bring to a helper whatever hope you're able to find within you that just because this happened and I saw how it happened and I saw the gore of it, that I'll always have that picture in my mind. Try. I haven't had to be go through anything quite on the order that Pete went through, but there have been times in my life where I've had to get over tragedies of different kinds, and the temptation to replay an event that is awful, insulting, um, traumatizing in some way. And I was taught early in my 20s by a counselor that we're all responsible for our own happiness. I didn't like hearing it at the time, but how could I argue? Are you in charge of me being happy? Am I in charge of you being happy? Um, Sometimes married partners might want to, slough that off on the other one. I'd be happy if only my husband would stop doing X. Well, making one's happiness conditional upon anything outside oneself, I think, is a bad idea. It's lesson I learned in my 20s and I've tried to carry forward. So, um, his helpers were wise in that they allowed him to view his accident, but he said only from a height. So he didn't have too much gore to then have to process later. It's best to try to let that stuff go. There are different ways of doing that, but trusting that it can happen, especially with the help of someone providing some guidance, that's good. They showed him that, and then he said they separated out things. Marco, the angel whom you just met, was right away at my side. He was saying something like, "Come with me." He was authoritative without being bossy. Well, that's a good thing. I trusted him immediately. He told the bare facts. Here's what just occurred. You lost focus for a moment. The car went off the road. I like the way he put that. Um, there's a, I don't remember the grammar of it, but the way that he said it, uh, you lost focus for a moment. He didn't say you drove recklessly, left the roadway and slammed into a wedding reception and killed two people. He just said you lost focus for a moment, which was true. The car went off the road, right? It wasn't uh, you drove your car off a road. It was the car went off a road. So he was general about providing basic facts. Karen wanted a little clarity about the neighborhood and what the houses were like, and the fact that the surroundings were nice. Um, um, Pete talked a little bit about the phone that we were using. We use my iPhone to record our sessions, and it's always right next to me when we're doing that. And he said people were just beginning to have phones like that, not the little flip ones, but the ones that are really small computers. And they said anymore, you could go on YouTube and ask for directions about how to do just about anything. And Karen said, yeah, that's right. Pete said, yeah, they're basic templates for how to do just about anything. Well, they showed me that there was a template for getting over what had happened to me. They talked about it in terms of layers. In the abstract, a person who's gone through something like what you did might have these layered issues from more layered generals than others might, like dying suddenly in a car crash. The next layer was being the driver of the car that caused the crash. The next layer is being the driver that caused a crash that not only took your life, but the life of someone else. And on top of that, oh, by the way, it was at a wedding reception. So he said they took it step by step by step. I've seen sometimes that people will take all of those elements and instead of putting them in an orderly way, like I'll deal with this and then I'll deal with that and then I'll deal with that, they rather have a perverse enjoyment of stacking them all up. If that weren't bad enough, then there was this. And on top of that, it was even worse. And before long, they have a big edifice of grief and sadness and can sort of try to get a compassionate listener to agree that you'll probably never get over this because who would? It's just so, it's all so awful. Well, be careful, please, about that kind of stacking. Instead of making them up and down like an insurmountable obstacle, could you put them on their side and think of them as like uh, they're in a row and you deal with one and then the next and then the next and the next. You know, that was helpful for Pete. He said they laid it out sequentially. Uh, they showed me that even though this was a complex series of things, that you could choose a pathway to do one of them at a time. Uh, Pete had told us he had studied engineering. He didn't say he was still studying it, but he said, I liked systems thinking. Um, Methods, looking at end game information. What's the desired state of this whole project? What are we trying to accomplish? Um, and he was told that he was living happily and peacefully and going about his business when this accident happened. And the question that his team put to him, is there a way to come back to a similar state after something like this tragedy happens? That's hugely important because I've dealt with people who all they want is for things to be back the way they were before the tragedy happened. Well, that's not happening. They said, is there a way to come back to some similar state after something tragic happens? Can you regain your peace? Can there be a somewhat similar state? They told him, you're not the first to die of a tragic thing. Here's a system for how others have moved through, and here are some options. So Pete said, they gave me all of this to consider. And he said, it's really funny because it would sound like all that would take a lot of time to think one's way through, but it didn't feel that way. It felt almost instant, like I was given a lot of options, and then it nearly selected itself. Um, if you could imagine plugging all this into a computer and pushing a button, it was kind of like that. All I needed to do was ask. I just asked the whole team, okay, I see the complexity of what I've been through and I see the different options. And it was like a rapid computer that just eliminated everything except what was best. Isn't that cool? And they said, well, this isn't a once and for all calculation. This could be done again. But the way that you ask the question, this is the answer you're getting. And it also had some suggestions about pitfalls to avoid. And one of them was self-reproach. Um, you can add self-reproach to your plate if you want to linger on how stupid or what a bad guy you are or any of that. And he said, I just didn't see the point of that. So he said, had I survived it, I would have gone to jail, probably vehicular manslaughter or some kind of negligence. And he said, so if I had survived it, if I hadn't ruined my life, I would have at least put a big dent in it. It wouldn't have been at all my intention to go to jail for taking other people's lives because of my carelessness. Anyway, he back to his afterlife. He said, "Now they told me here's your current state." And he said, "Current state, that's a thing that engineers always start with. That's the way you begin a process. What's the current state of the issue?" They told me, "Well, here it is." They showed him his current state, and the process that they were put in place for him had a kind of a numerical sequence about it. Um, it involved some uh, orientation, a starting function, getting some equilibrium, and then getting started on healing one aspect of it at a time. Um, anyway, he said, I'd never done anything around death, grief stuff, but when I read about it or had any exposure to it, that's always the approach I thought I might take to it if I ever needed to do that. Um, he had kind of daydreamed when he'd heard about other people's tragedies about if I had gone through that, here's how I might react afterwards. Here's how I might move on. So um, they we were he wouldn't have come to us if he weren't ready to leave the level he's been at since his accident and move along. But he also told us that in getting ready for meeting up with us, he had studied, and what part of what he had done is read the books that we've written, make himself familiar with the material. And in one of them, he met Erik. Erik was gave permission for his story to be used in one of our books. I think it was the first. Erik had finished an undergraduate degree. He was going to go on for a PhD. Both of his parents were PhDs, and that was the family script. He was their only kid. But he didn't want something clunky. He said he wanted to study interdisciplinary fields, but universities aren't always well organized to do that. They often, he said, would say they are, but then it meant more work for the professors to actually craft individual plans of study rather than just have you go through something that was already laid out. Nevertheless, um, Pete had already developed something of a relationship with Erik. He just admired him in the way that Erik had died on a hike where he took a step that created a bit of a rock slide, landslide that he tumbled downhill and was covered with rocks and dirt and couldn't breathe and he died. But he was an engineer or a student of engineering and was very methodical in the way that he described what happened next. He wanted to know how the whole universe worked. I'm still speaking about Erik here. And he was fascinated with the work of Albert Einstein. And he knew that Einstein wasn't just good at physics, math, and science, but also had a kind of mystic sense about him. And uh, when it came time for Erik to ask for the person that he would need to be accompanied by, Erik said, if I can ask for anybody, I want Einstein. So it turned out that Dr. Einstein showed up for him. Well, uh, Pete now is asking for Erik, and he said, I just was so. much admiring of Erik because he looked at what was in front of him, his current state, and then he kind of, went for the moon, the stars, and said, "Well, if I can have anybody, I want Einstein." And so uh, Pete said, "Well, I want a thinker like that, someone whose imagination can take them anywhere they want to go." Karen asked about Dr. Einstein, and uh, Erik offered this. It wouldn't surprise you, I don't think, to know that he's in something like the quantum field, where he's not in only one place. He's in many places. He can go anywhere that his imagination takes him. He took to that like a downhill skier. He wanted to follow everything to its conclusion and learn early on the skill that he needed to be in more than one place at a time without being divided. Hmm. Einstein is thought to be such a brilliant human being that he has no equal. I don't know that he would say that, but he had a human imagination and uh, a human reconstitution in the afterlife, but he set out to find what his new way of being was capable of. And he learned that with some training or practice, he could learn how to be in many places at once and be fully present to all of them. Well, any of you who are Roman Catholic and know of the mystical tradition of the mystics, anybody else that really knows about the mystical tradition as it moves across different faiths, um, being in more than one place at a time after we die is pretty commonplace. In the Roman Catholic Church, at the same canonized human being, whom we call a saint, might have many, many different places put under their charge. How many uh, hospitals and schools and orphanages or ministries of different kinds are under the patron of the same saint, except they're able to be present to all of them all of the time. Anyway, um, Erik thought that Pete was setting his sights a little bit low. He hadn't quite, aspired for something big, but he's hoping that Pete will take a look around and have a sense of wonder at the vastness of what's possible and get excited about it. Um, so it really ended up when it was time to go that um, that Erik was in charge of seeing that Pete moved along. Uh, Pete kind of threw a compliment Erik's way and said, "Remember, Pete asked for Einstein, but in the headline story of your book, uh, it was Erik and Albert Einstein. Einstein getting was the subtext," he said, or Erik was the first one on the marquee if it were a movie. Anyway, he said, today we're going to go for a hike the way that Erik leads. Erik didn't mind hiking again after having died on a hike. Uh, and he said, maybe Pete will be behind the wheel of a truck again one day, but not today. Today, we're just going to go for a hike. Well, that's the compassionate response episode. Mostly, I think the compassionate response that Pete received and uh, took part in actively was being methodical, breaking down a complex problem, even a grief problem. This was not math or science, this was heartbreak and tragedy and trauma. But even that can be approached in a methodical way. If you're somebody that never wanted to go anywhere near engineering and science, somebody like me, you might think you just don't have the temperament to be that methodical, that that's for the science people. And you might want to say, well, this tangle of grief that I'm in, I couldn't do it that way. Well, please don't um, talk yourself out of it before you've even tried. It might be that the most graceful thing you could do for yourself is to allow someone to show you the template. Here's a method that we can go through to minimize the pain that you're in and do the best we can to get you back to something like a peaceful state that you enjoyed before all this tragedy entered in to begin with. That's it for this episode. I'm going to go on in the next one to what we call spiritual practice that arises out of this story. And I have an idea for it that I hope you are going to enjoy. I think you will. If you're somehow finding this podcast without a context of any of the previous ones or the books that I've written about, I'd encourage you to check out my Afterlife Interrupted book series. They're all available on Amazon. They're not a difficult read. They're there in different formats, including an audiobook if you prefer to listen as you're commuting or exercising or something. If you wanted to be in touch with me because you're curious about this process, I ask that you first read one of the books. That'll make our conversation more fruitful. Remember, I pray for you all the time, and when I do, I ask that the Holy Spirit, I believe God's everywhere, and the insides of you and your imagination are a place. Inside you, there might be buried in a place that you can't even find anymore, the root cause of something that continues to steal your joy. Might be something that happened long ago, some life disappointment, some grief, something in you that causes dis-ease. I pray that the Holy Spirit uh, can uh, go into that place with your permission. Your permission is very important. If you say to the Holy Spirit of God, you have the permission to move about in me and help bring to clarity where there's a root cause, that way I could get to work on it. That's the way I pray for you when I do. All right. So thank you for being a part of this episode, and I hope you'll join me next time for the spiritual practice that we think uh, emerges from the story of Pete. Okay? God bless you. Bye bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Joyful Friar. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can visit me at nathan-castle.com. Send me a message by clicking the contact button. God bless.
Have you ever had to do something so difficult that you had to deal with it in stages? Imagine dying suddenly with no forewarning, being in a car crash, a shooting, a drowning. You leave your body, but then what? How do you transition into the afterlife? For some, it flows all at once, but not for everybody. For some, the process of transitioning into the afterlife is interrupted. Maybe there's a need for rest or for learning, or maybe just the chance to adjust to such an abrupt experience. I'm Father Nathan Castle. I'm a Catholic priest. About 23 years ago, the Holy Spirit began to send me people who had died traumatically. They entered my dreams during sleep, showing me what had happened to them and asking for help. They had died and moved on, sort of, but they'd come to a moment where it was time to complete the crossing. With the help of the angels and saints and earthly prayer partners, we've assisted more than 300 souls as they complete their crossing. You can read about it in my book series. Afterlife Interrupted books are available on Amazon. You can also learn more by visiting my website, nathan-castle.com. God bless you.